Hello everyone, and welcome to Creative Connections. My name is Frances, and I'm your host for today's session, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Ananth and Tom from Polykala. But first, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many countries throughout Australia and from where you are all joining us from today. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands and waters upon which I am lucky enough to live, work and play here in Sydney. I recognise the great diversity, creativity and endurance of our First Peoples of Australia and pay my deep respect to their elders, past, present and future. I encourage you all to share your acknowledgement or where you're joining us from today in the chat. So currently on site is a white and maroon PowerPoint slide with some text and video boxes with our speakers and Auslan interpreters for today, Shavoy and David. I'm your host for today's session. I'm a woman in my early 30s with fair skin, wavy brown hair, blue eyes, and today wearing a checkered green and white shirt. In the background, there are some plants and colourful artworks on the wall, and my couch in my living room. And out of picture is a sleeping puppy at my feet for now. Let's hope she doesn't wake up. So it's hard to believe that we've been running this series for now 5 weeks and that many of us are now at the end of week 8 of lockdown, some even more. We hope that you've found this series to be useful and that you're able to join the sessions that are relevant to you to offer you some support through this intense time of change. And while the uncertainty becomes familiar, it doesn't necessarily become easier. We encourage you to stay connected in any way that works best for you, and we thank you all for joining us here today. Soon we'll be launching some fresh new sessions for you to sign up to. These have been curated with the ever-changing times in mind. Please keep an eye out on our website for all new webinars shortly, which will kickstart next Friday with a focus on social media. We'll be hearing directly from some of the key players behind Facebook and Instagram, and these sessions are now live online for you to register for. As always, we look forward to supporting each other to explore new ways that we will adapt our leadership, our practices, and our digital capabilities together. So before I begin, I wanted to draw your attention to a new section on our website which gathers together all of the content and resources that are available to you. Please visit www.australiacouncil.gov.au/programs-and-resources for up-to-date information about all of our webinars, discussions, podcasts, and more. Later today, Wesley Enoch and Leanne Buckskin will be hosting the regular First Nations Roundtable. This week it has a focus on industry on stage. This is at 2 o'clock today. These are every Friday, same time, same place, and everyone is welcome. Please join us. On Tuesday next week at 2 p.m, inside the square, we'll be focusing on digital adaptation in a local space. And these sessions are available on Zoom or live streamed also through the Arts and Creative Industry Facebook page. There is also a great new podcast series for those of you who haven't seen it yet, and for those of you maybe tiring from too much screen time. These sessions are short, snappy spotlights on local and international artists who work within cross-cultural and cross-border capacities. The first 3 episodes are available online now via our website or SoundCloud, and episodes are released every Thursday night at 5 p.m. So last night's episode, Showing Up for Each Other with Samara Hirsch, you'll hear a bit about her practice and digital collaboration between Amsterdam, Melbourne and Singapore. So just some quick housekeeping before we get started. Live captioning is now available via Zoom and should have started automatically below for you. If not, just click on the CC button. It's also available via stream text. If you would prefer, we'll post the link in the chat and you can just view this in a pop-out browser if you would like. During the session, as always, we invite you to engage with each other on the chat feature, which today Kevin will be managing from our team. Please feel free to share any thoughts, links, ideas, examples that relate to today's topic. Similarly, if a question comes to mind during today's session, please just post it in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Ian will be online to manage these today. We'll aim to get through as many as we can by the end of the session. If at any point you need some tech help, please just raise your hand using the raise hand function feature at the bottom of your screen also, and someone will be on hand to help. And finally, a recording of today's webinar, as always, will be available after the session around mid next week, which we'll send to you via email and will also be available on the Australia Council website. There is also a short survey in this email, and we ask that you just spend 5 minutes filling this out to help us improve this series for you. So now on screen is a PowerPoint slide to introduce our wonderful guests. There is some text and 2 photos, both black and white images in circles. On the left is Ananth, a brown-skinned man with dark hair, full beard, wearing a scarf and a jacket, smiling directly at the camera. On the right is Tom, a fair-skinned man with brown hair, collared shirt, with a big beaming smile and dimples. Ananth and Tom are both directors and facilitators at Polykala. Polykala design and deliver experiential training programs focusing on leadership development, group facilitation, effective communication, and diversity and inclusion. They believe in the power of people and the strength of bringing people together to collaborate and solve complex ideas, which is why this year we invited them to be our 2020 Future Leaders facilitators. Today, Tom and Ananth will lead us through a series of slides to talk through what it means to balance responsibility and innovation during these volatile times. They will challenge our thinking around leadership and authority and get us reflecting on what is needed, truly needed at this time. Please feel free to share your own thoughts in the chat as we go. Ananth and Tom, thank you both so much for being here and sharing your ideas with us. I'll now hand it to you, Ananth. I believe you're starting and you have some slides to share with us. Just take yourself off mute quickly.
Great. Thanks so much, Francis. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, though not in person, but at least digitally and in spirit. And I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm standing here in my home, but in lands that have been continuously cared for by the Gunai people for time immemorial. Some say 60,000 years, but my First Nations brothers and sisters say, Ananth, it's actually forever. So I acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. And we're here to speak about balancing responsibility and innovation in volatile times. And in this first slide here, there is a picture of a fern, of an australis fern, with 2 little shoots just emerging from maybe 3/4 of the way through the frond. And the photos in this presentation are all taken by me. I'm a geographer and an actor, and Tom, Henderson and I, we both share a love of forest, of farm, and of country, and the way in which the natural world can teach us and can guide us in really difficult times. So who are we? You've heard a little bit about what we look like. I'm a brown-skinned fella. I look pretty Indian because I am. And we've got Tom Henderson. He's a white fella. He looks pretty white because he is. And we live on Gunai country and Wurundjeri country. And as Francis mentioned, we are leadership development facilitators. And specifically, we draw on our experience in creative arts, particularly performing arts, to develop leadership capacity. And we're incredibly honored to be facilitating the Future Leaders program in 2021 and not 2020. So why are we here today? Well, we've got basically 2 ideas that we want to share with you. The first one is about cultural adaptation, and we want to unpack what we mean by that. And the second is leadership and authority. the balancing act, or the dance, if you will, between responsibility and innovation. And the second purpose of this session is to reflect on these ideas with you and hopefully support you to reflect on them and apply them in your context. So the first idea. What we've got here on the screen is a white background, and we have in my crude drawing, a circle, a pie chart with the word keep written in it. And in a dotted line, we've got a slice indicating 2 bits of the pie. One bit that has an arrow from the pie leading away from it named let go, and another bit outside of the pie coming in with the word grow. And what I want to do now is I really want to reflect on the word adaptation. Looking back to the second slide that Francis showed at the top of this introduction to the webinar, we had the word adaptation and adapt in a number of points, digitally, in terms of leadership, and in terms of how we operate. And what I want to do is I just want to slow down, and I want to reflect on and think about and share some thoughts I have on adaptation. But not adaptation in the biological ecosystem sense, although I'm more than happy to talk about that later. I want to talk about it when it comes to our values, our identities, our stories, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, to ourselves, our reputation, our loyalties, our status, our history, our image. These are what I like to call parts of our cultural DNA, the core facets of who we are as individuals, as families, as collectives, and as societies. So when we're balancing the responsibility of innovation and stability, really the conversation about adaptation, in my mind, has 3 parts. The first part of adaptation is what will not change, what cannot change, and what we refuse to change. So that, in the pie chart, is called keep. And, you know, it's a funny thing about the word change. We often talk about it in a way that doesn't really unpack what the components are. And I want to suggest to you that the biggest changes that we're facing right now actually call into question and call into being what we don't want to let go of, what we want to keep. So the first aspect of adaptation, funnily enough, is what we don't want to let go of. Genetically speaking, me and you and I, all of us across this country, we're about 97.4%, give or take, genetically speaking, bonobo chimpanzees. However, that little piece of our genetic sequence, our genome, is Homo sapien. That little piece of change throughout time of where our DNA has been let go of, and we've developed new ways of operating with each other, in other words, have grown, gives us our shared humanity. So the second aspect of adaptation after what we keep is what we let go of. And too often, people like me, people who work in leadership and facilitation, we focus on what's new, what's innovative, what's fresh, and what's shiny. And I think we do a disservice because we don't talk honestly enough, sincerely enough about loss. And right now, all of us across the world, from my family in India to my friends in New Zealand where I grew up, to my neighbours here in West Gippsland and Warragul, we're all living in a kind of a slow-moving earthquake that's shaking every fibre of our world. And this morning I was reading the news, surprisingly enough, in The Guardian, a column by Paul Daly, and he talked about the fact that many businesses, many enterprises, many organizations will not survive, will be lost, at least in their current form. And it sort of just brought me down to my seat and got me thinking. There are some non-negotiable aspects to what we're facing right now. And as we think about the fact that, oh, maybe lockdown's going to end. Maybe restrictions are going to lift. It also made me think, wow, I think we're just beginning the process of adaptation, because we're moving outside of the critical and acute phase, and instead we're moving into this next phase of cultural adaptation, where we as individuals, as collectives, as art makers, as managers, we really need to have a conversation about what do we let go of, what won't we let go of, and lastly, what do we need to grow? So when we talk about innovation, I feel like we need to talk about innovation with respect to what will not survive. And I think that encodes a moral responsibility and an emotional responsibility. So when we're talking about values, identities, stories, reputation, loyalty, status, history, image, and a lot more, the conversation is a tussle between what do we keep, what do we let go of, and what do we grow, what emerges from the undergrowth as we move from the critical phase to the next phase of perhaps rebuilding, perhaps restoring, and I think almost certainly reimagining. So I'm going to pass you to Tom Henderson to help reflect on a few of these questions.
Thanks, Ananth. So what we really want to encourage you to do, not right now, but in the next little while, is to really take some time to reflect on these aspects of adaptation that Ananth has outlined. So that can be really hard right now. You know, we have a lot of physical space, a lot of us, but the headspace is tough to find. So in spite of that, we really encourage you to take some time by yourself or with others, perhaps colleagues, perhaps members of a collective you might be a part of, or just someone you trust, to really consider these 3 points. Firstly, as it's written on the page, what responsibility do you have to keep aspects of the status quo as they are? So you might have a formal responsibility, positional responsibility, that is entrusted in you to keep things going a certain way. And I want to offer a different facet of that question around what do we keep? And I want to frame it like this. What aspects of your industry or your practice will stay the same? They won't change because they're not in question. And that can be a reassuring thing to start. The second question that I would like for you to take the time to sit with is, what is precious that you are unwilling to let go of? So what is fundamental to you, to your practice, to your industry, to your profession, that you are unwilling to let go of? And when it comes to the negotiation going forward, it will be really important to have a sense of that for yourself, of what you're going to keep a firm hold of, regardless of what happens or what's asked of you. An inflection of that question is, what aspects of your industry, organisation or practice will you need to let go of, that you might not have a huge say in the matter, and it might be painful for you to do so, to have some preparation around that. And finally, this is something that you perhaps have spent a lot of time thinking about and has been perhaps particularly noisy, hence why we've left it until the end, which is, what new skills, attitudes or capabilities do you want to grow? There is a lot of noise at the moment around new skills, new things, and I'm reminded of an article that one of the future leaders has pointed our attention to around just giving yourself some space to block out that noise if you need to. But also to think about what new skills, attitudes, or capabilities you do want to grow going forward that will be useful to you, that will be useful to your colleagues. So we won't be spending time on this now. That's difficult in this medium, but I want to encourage you to come back to these questions in the next couple of days or even today, and just to sit with them, to see what emerges and to share with those around you, or to really push those around you to sit with these questions too, because it can be uncomfortable to do so. It might be something that we find ourselves wanting to avoid. So this will be available in recorded form after this. We really strongly encourage you to sit with these questions and take the time with them. I'll pass you back to Ananth, and I'll remove my video to carry forward.
Okay, you're back with me, folks. So as we pivot to the second facet of today's webinar, I want you to just take a moment to locate yourself, not only where you are physically in your home or in your studios or in your offices, but to locate yourself somewhere in the ecosystem of the arts in Australia. You have varying levels of formal and informal authority. You have varying levels of responsibility for people, for your art form, for the centres that you work in, and perhaps overall for the industry. And what I want to do now is I want to put the second conceptual frame that might help, or might at the very least provoke your thinking. Okay, so here is the second piece of my artwork. As you could probably tell, visual arts in the form of sketching and drawing is not my forte. I seem to not even be able to draw a symmetrical figure of eight. But what we have here is a white page, and we have a figure of eight lying down on its side in an infinity symbol. And this particular diagram is titled The Dance. In the first conceptual frame with that pie chart diagram that I talked about a few minutes ago, there I tried to unpack the word change, and I tried to unpack the word adaptation into three parts. What do we keep? What do we let go of? What do we grow? This second frame does another disambiguation or splitting apart job. And what I'm trying to do here in this diagram is to distinguish between the word leadership and authority. If you're anything like me, you have probably in the first few weeks read a whole bunch of the news, and then you felt overwhelmed and you ran away and stared at your chickens. If you have chickens, I have 5, I stare at them a lot, because there's this incredible pressure, and there's so much resting on our authorities to keep us safe, to keep us well, and to keep our country and our states more or less together. But at the same time, you've probably heard the phrase leadership. Well, we need strong leadership. We need, that certain countries in the world are showing leadership, not naming any names, Trump, and certain places are not, are showing leadership. I think about the fact that Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, I've been really proud to be a Kiwi, and thinking about her style of leadership of, as she puts it, kindness. This diagram, and I'm using my hands here as well, tries to separate leadership and authority, not to split them apart into unrelated ideas, but in fact to link them together in a continuous circuit called the dance. So in this diagram, we have arrows moving like electricity would in a circuit from authority to leadership and leadership to authority. Leadership is located on the left-hand side of the screen and is symbolized by a green triangle. Authority is located on the right-hand side of the screen and has a blue square as its symbol. Underneath the word, or underneath authority, are 4 functions that authority we're putting to you is responsible for. Authority, or good management, is responsible for providing order, protection, direction, and implementation, making things happen. On the other side, underneath the leadership symbol by the triangle, are 4 functions. One is to sense, be it through data, be it through instruments, be it through your own body and emotions, to sense and detect and to observe what is happening in the environment. The next function of leadership is to challenge the status quo, to introduce change, to shake things up into the system. So the third function of leadership is to disrupt the status quo and move it away from the way things are to the way things could be, the way things ought to be, the way things might be. And fundamentally, the function of leadership we're arguing, or we're putting to you, is leadership is to innovate, to create something from the status quo that will make a difference, hopefully a positive difference to the status quo, and to initiate something. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the 2 extreme parts of the diagram. On the extreme right of the diagram are the words stagnation and oppression. And those 2 words symbolize or represent too much authority. When there is too much management, too much keeping things the way they are, you have a stagnation or an oppression. And I'm thinking, for instance, about the Dr. Wen Liang, a doctor in Wuhan province in China who blew the whistle and raised some awareness. He challenged the status quo and said, I think we've got a real problem here. And in that case, his leadership action, his disruption, his innovation, his blowing the whistle was squashed. And I want to take a moment to remember Dr. Wen Liang, because he's no longer with us. So too much authority can result in tyranny and stagnation. New things don't emerge. So that's too much authority. I want to switch your eyes now to the extreme left of the screen. And I want to put to you that too much leadership in times of volatility, or perhaps any time, results in chaos and disequilibrium. What do we do? Where do we go? Who's going to keep us safe? These are all unanswered questions, and it causes far too much disequilibrium and distress in the system. Healthy systems don't go all the way over to stagnation or all the way over into chaos. Healthy systems have a flowing balance between leadership and authority. And when I say system, I mean any group of people, organization, society, or company, but I also mean you and me. We're a system too, and some of us will look to order, protection, direction, clarity, and answers in times of distress and volatility. And some of us, depending on the time of the day or our personality, may see this as an opportunity for challenging the status quo, disrupting norms, calling truth into account, calling power into account, and may prompt us to innovate and initiate. But we can't have too much of one without the other. So what I want to put to you is that leadership and authority are distinct features of any healthy system. Leadership is a verb. It is something that you do, we do, anybody can do, irrespective of their place on the hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you're not the CEO or the artistic director or whatever it may be, you can still sense, challenge, disrupt, and innovate. But that doesn't mean that a system can survive, or an organization or an arts collective can survive, especially now, without order, protection, keeping people safe, direction, letting people know, for instance, when things might change, when things might return to whatever normal is going to be going forward. So I want to put to you that leadership and authority, and I'm now swaying my body from left to right, have this movement, this dance between innovation and stability. And we want to say that in these times of volatility, you and me, we're being called on to provide order and to deliver innovation. And this tension, it's a pretty tough ask. And some of us will be pulled this way to the right, and some of us might be pulled that way to the left. And this tension, we want to suggest, can't be resolved and ought not to be resolved. And when I say resolved, I mean to be made to go away. This tension is the very motor of adaptation. So when we think about what do we keep, what do we let go, and what do we grow? Well, we need a healthy polarity between leadership, symbolized by the green triangle, and authority, symbolized by the blue square, so that the responsibility of innovation can be balanced, funnily enough, with the responsibility of not innovation. So, leadership is a verb. It is the practice of letting people down gracefully on a good day. And it's related to the let go component of that pie chart. Leadership is also the practice of reassuring people about what won't be lost. And finally, leadership is about energizing people towards possibility using evidence, using creativity, and using collective action that can enable new cultural DNA, new practices, new procedures, new systems to grow. And this particular image that's sitting at the background of this slide, I took of a Eucalyptus regnans, a Victorian mountain ash that had been felled in Mount Worth State Forest on the Strzelecki Ranges, bordering West and South Gippsland on Gunai-Kurnai country. And you can see that the log has a number of beautiful species of fungi emerging through it. And for me, this is, I guess, a visual metaphor for this tall, strong, straight piece of timber now lying flat. But through it, we have the emergence of a decomposition species, fungi. But the creativity and diversity of these species, to me at least, is striking and beautiful. I'm going to pass you, and looking at that timber upright in this next image is, got me thinking about authority as a noun, which is responsible for maintaining the status quo and providing order, protection, and direction. I'm going to pass you to Tom to just work through these last couple of slides.
Thanks, Ananth. There's a couple of comments I just really want to highlight because I think they're really insightful. The first is a comment that is, where I'm just find it. Here it is. About this suggestion that the connection between artists and leadership. And I think that's a really insightful idea, comment. It's typical and it's assumed that Artists are there to challenge, to disrupt, to question, and to reflect back to us. And I think that's particularly relevant right now. So I think that's a really important one to highlight. Also, there's a comment here around leadership seen as a challenge by authority. And I think that's a really important one too, that depending on where we sit, whether we have a position, a formal position, we might see leadership or challenge or disruption as just that. We'll see it as a disruption. But it also might be seen as a welcome disruption. It might be seen as a great idea. So it really depends on the tendencies that we as individuals have, but also the tendencies that systems have. So culture is a really important facet here. And by culture, I don't mean your heritage or your ethnicity. What we mean by that is the way that we relate to each other within a given system. So I think those 2 points are really worth highlighting, and I'll head back to where I should be. So just to highlight what Ananth has gone through on the 8th slide around authority, that authority is a noun. It's something that we have or we have less of, and it's something that's either entrusted to us to deliver, or it's something that we might seek to have, and therefore is a noun. So order is who is doing what. Protection is, are we safe right now? And direction is where are we going? Where are we heading? So these are the things that will be expected of us when we might be in situations that are a bit unstable or unclear. Why is all this important? And that's a very good question. It's important because if you are responsible for people, they'll be looking to you for guidance. They'll be looking to you for order, protection, and direction. And they'll be hoping that you will go some way to restoring the status quo, depending on who they are. So if we see enacting leadership as challenging the status quo, it begs the question of how do we bring people along if we don't have that authority vested already? How do we bring people along when they're already experiencing instability? And that's a tricky question. It's not one that we can answer right now, but it's something that if you are seeking to challenge, and if you're seeking to innovate, that it bears thinking about how the system is going and whether it can cope with more instability given where you sit within a particular system. So we want to suggest to you that there's a creative tension between innovation or leadership and stabilization, which typically comes from authority. So in terms of takeaways, actually, before I do that, I might just ask Ananth if there's anything you want to add to that. If there's anything I've missed, please jump in and.
Sure, thanks, Tom. I guess the one thing that I want to add, especially when speaking with folks like me who are actors, or folks who aren't like me, who are performers, musicians, etc. For me, at least, I know that I've been playing a role, and I enjoy playing a role of challenging the status quo, of disrupting, of asking tricky questions. And I've worn that as part of my identity as an improvisational actor, but also sometimes as a facilitator. And when I think about roles, I also think about how hard it can be sometimes to take off the costume of that role. So what I want to put to all of you is to consider what your relationship personally, and also perhaps within your collective or organization, what's your relationship to authority? How do you feel when people look to you for guidance to provide order, protection, and direction? Does it feel like, oh, I don't know, work it out yourself? Or does it feel like you can be, a benevolent authority? Or perhaps do you feel like your craft or your profession or the sector has some sort of allergic reaction to being authoritative? Because if you're anything like me, you almost code it in your brain as authority equals tyranny, stagnation, oppression, brutality. But instead, what we want to challenge you to think about is actually all systems, from family levels to kinship levels, right up to states and societies, they actually all need forms of order, protection, and direction. So we really don't want for you to walk away thinking, oh, leadership good, authority bad. Actually, they're both value neutral. Neither one is better than the other, but we'll all have different individual relationships to challenging the status quo and upholding the status quo. And the last point that I want to add in this creative tension between innovation and stabilization, some of us at this really peculiar, difficult, dizzying time will be asked to provide stabilization when we're normally used to providing innovation, providing creativity. And what's it like to play outside of your typecast character? That's what I wanted to add there, Tom.
So the bell suggests we're getting towards our time boundary. So I'll take you to the final slide, which is just a couple of takeaway ideas and prompts that we'd like to leave you with. The first is that, excuse me, if it is my responsibility to provide order, protection, and direction, how do I feel about that? Is that something I wear comfortably, or is that something that I'm somewhat allergic to? And the second prompt is the Australian arts community really needs leadership right now. It needs assistance to go through this process of considering what it needs to keep and maintain, what it needs to let go of, and what it needs to grow into. And how might I, or how might we contribute to that as an individual, as an organisation, as a collective? Ananth and I work in some very different environments, and sometimes we'll find ourselves working in more traditional industries that are fundamentally designed to provide order. One that comes to mind is the police. On a rare occasion, we'll find ourselves in a room with officers, and it's scary, but it's also fairly obvious to say that those environments will be more comfortable with providing authority, but also existing in a very structured environment. That's how they've been set up, and it's how they operate. We've also noticed when we find ourselves in environments that are more geared towards the socially progressive left, we've really picked up an allergy, if you will, towards authority. And at times people not wanting to admit that they are in fact in charge, or that they, that they might not want to give orders, because that might be seen as a negative feature. So your tendencies, your organization's tendencies are a really important feature here, to really sit with, how do I feel being in that situation of telling people what to do or receiving orders? But also, how do I feel being an initiator? How do I feel raising my hand and suggesting that we do things differently? And how do I also feel on the receiving end of that? So these are some takeaways we'd like you to similarly sit with and ponder. And we'll leave our time boundary there.
Great, thank you so much, Tom and Ananth. I'm just going to quickly bring up my slides. Final few. So I think you answered everyone's questions throughout as we were going, but I just wanted to, before we finish up, share a comment that I saw in the chat just before we ended, which I thought was quite lovely. And it was from Anonymous, but they said, the ability to embrace complexity and not operate in dichotomies challenge us the best. And the metaphor of the dance encompasses this beautifully. It's a yes and proposition. And I think that comment just sums up, you know, your presentation and some of the things that you've asked us to reflect on throughout today. So thank you both again so much. If you've not got anything else to add, I think we don't have any questions for today, so we'll just start wrapping up. We hope you'll join us next week. We have a few more Creative Connection sessions on Wednesday at 3 p.m. and we'll hear from Mish and Lara, two of the co-directors at Aphids, who will share their thoughts on collectivism and collaboration. Then on Friday, we have one of our new sessions, which is from Zach Alameda at Instagram, who will be talking us through how to build your brand through Instagram. So it's available to sign up to, so please jump on and register after this session. I can see that we actually have had a couple of questions come through now, so maybe just quickly, if you guys, Tom and Ananth, if you've got a few minutes, we'll...
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question here is from Michelle. I can see those in power, including my Conservative local government, using this pause as a way to be regressive. Tips?
I'll leave it for you, Tom. No, that's just me throwing you under the bus. Well, ask yourself, Michelle, what kind of access do you have to be in conversation with your local MP? So talking about politics, many of us may not be aware of who our local MP is, and many of us may not have some channel of communication. Hold them to account by asking them for how long will these regressions be tolerated and why. So if you think about like the app, the COVID Safe app, that has a shelf life on it, and we've been assured by the authorities, the government, that it's not going to be around forever. So ask them about the duration of said regression. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thanks, Ananth. And just one last one from Bastian, who's actually part of our 2020 Future Leaders program, asks, can I ask how to find a platform for leadership if you're not in a dialogue with those who exercise authority?
I'm going to flip that very, very slightly, Bastian. I'm going to say, how do I exercise leadership if you're not in dialogue with those who have a platform of authority? So I really want you to consider how leadership is a verb, something that you do rather than something that you have or don't have. So I would like to prompt you all to not consider being a leader as some sort of cape with a badge or something on it. So if you're not in dialogue with those who exercise authority, seek allies who are, foster partnerships with people such as the Australia Council for the Arts, who are sort of authority adjacent, if you want to put it that way, and seek to build some sort of dialogue with them. It's really, really difficult to dance when the relationship with authority is ipso facto hostile. Tom, you might want to add something there.
This might be something just to consider down the track, and that's spending some time thinking about how your challenge might be received. So it might be received warmly, it might be accepted, it also might be squashed. So in terms of, I think, both, relating to your local government, but also thinking about how to be in contact with people that you're not necessarily in dialogue with. Just consider that. Consider how your great idea, your great initiative might be received by those folks in authority, and that might be just a useful thing to consider and to sit with, so that you are somewhat prepared.
The last little cent I'll throw in is, if you're seeing yourself as somebody who's exercising leadership, then also please recognize that you're also triggering people's loss aversion. By people, I mean systems, groups, authorities' loss aversion. People are not change averse. Human beings are not stupid. People can be loss averse. So if you can speak to, if your leadership idea, your, hey, I want to do this, can actually pre-prepare or think about, what are the actual losses of values, identities, stories, etc., that my idea might be triggering, so that when you exercise leadership, you can actually be attentive emotionally, if nothing else, to that loss aversion response. And that at the very minimum will hopefully crank up the levels of compassion and help you, or help them tolerate the level of disequilibrium. Because leadership really is about growing appetite for disequilibrium, but also helping people cop those losses, even if those losses are symbolic rather than, money or resources.
Great. Thank you both so much for those generous answers and for, some really actually helpful tips. Just a quick reminder before we finish up that we'd love your feedback on these webinars. We want to know how we're doing, what we can develop, what we can do better. So you'll receive an email, just a reminder, next week with a survey with the recording when we send it through to you. And I encourage you, like Tom and Ananth said, to go back to those questions, reflect on them, and to spend some time sitting with them, and to share your thoughts with us if you'd like to. I'm sure Tom and Ananth would love to hear from you. So thank you again for joining us today. To Ananth, Tom, our Auslan interpreters, David, Chavoy, my wonderful team working behind the scenes, Kevin, Ian and Laura, and of course to all of you. Thank you for your strength, your ambition and your creativity. We hope to see you here next time. Bye for now.